Good morning, church. My name is Pastor Anne Marie, and we are so delighted that you have decided to join us in worship this morning. You may have noticed that our regular church staff crew is a little depleted this morning. Miss Elise is not feeling well, and Pastor Mike is off with some much-deserved time off. And so I just want to say thank you so much to all our volunteers who help us continue to be church even when we don't have everybody together. So just a big thank you to you all. Exactly. And I'm thinking for some of you, maybe some time off is on the brain, given what the rest of this week holds. Coming up in a few days, we have, of course, July 4th, and so maybe you are preparing to take a day or two for rest or relaxation, to maybe get together and have some good food, or see some beautiful fireworks, maybe to take some time to serve our neighbors or to pray for our church. I hope that y'all have some good things planned, that you're looking forward to it. I know that I am, but we're not quite there yet. And there's still a few things that I have to do, some tasks I need to check off before I reach those days off. The first is, of course, we have to have this church service together, so thank you all for being here. And the second is this evening I head out to Glen Lake, which is our conference-wide camp that puts on all kinds of fun things for kids and youth throughout the year. And this week, it's my joy to be the speaker for their Trek Camp, which is a 2-night sleepaway camp for kids who are 1st through 4th grade. We'll see if I make it back. But as I prepare messages for any kind of event, including Sunday mornings, what I often find is that in my preparation, there's always something that I need to learn. Something that I need to learn about God or about our faith or about who God is calling me to be. And the same was true as I prepared messages for camp this week. And I learned something so incredibly valuable that I feel like I need to share with all of you. I learned that I am so old. I'm not sure if this is a universal experience, but I had not realized how young I am not until I started crafting things for some of our youngest followers of Christ. And so the task seemed so beyond me, honestly, y'all, I had to call in some experts. So I talked to some children's pastors and some teachers. I sat down with literal kids in our congregation to help me figure out if I was funny or not. I wasn't. We worked on it. And then I had to talk to my husband, who is an 8th grade teacher, and all of a sudden knows so much more than I do about pop culture and what our youth are experiencing. And so, in an effort to share with these students in a way that is relatable and fun to them, I tried my best to learn some new youth lingo. Don't worry, I'm going to share some of my newfound knowledge with all of you this morning. So we're going to play just a very short game. And how it works is I'm going to put a word up on the screen, and you are going to guess whether the word is a synonym for something good or something not good by a thumbs up or a thumbs down. You don't have to play, but you are welcome to. So our first word is sus. If something is sus, does that mean that it is good or not good? You are correct. If something is sus, it's a shortened word for suspicious, right? So maybe you would wake up in the morning and say, wow, I really want some cereal, but I can't because that milk in the fridge is a little sus, right? Okay, so the first one, y'all are doing wonderful. Our second word is cap. Have y'all heard of cap before? Is that something good or something bad? Y'all are doing really well. Yes, cap is not good. It's another word for lie. It means you're beyond the capacity of the truth, I think. And so someone might say, oh, no, you can have that milk that's expired. And you might say, no, that's cap. See? Pastor Mike's going to be back next week, you guys, I promise. And so our last word is W-Riz. Is that good or not so good? Y'all took this test already. That's correct. Yeah, so a riz is a shortened word for charisma. It means that you're a smooth talker. Maybe you have a way with your words. You can't say you didn't learn anything today. But as I was preparing messages for these students, I had the sense that maybe you have had before. I looked out at the world, and I realized there was so much I didn't recognize. That so much of the world, of our culture, seemed past what I understand. And I feel like we experience this especially in Colleyville and Southlake, where literally the world around us has changed so much in the last few years, in the last 20 years. And so maybe you don't feel like this with language, but I wonder this morning if you've ever looked around at our world, the society that we inhabit, and wondered, how has so much changed from when I was growing up? I felt like I was still kind of a young person until I was working on these messages. How has so much changed already? And maybe it's not language that puts you in this state of wondering about the world. Maybe it's politics, or maybe it's the global hurt that we witness, or maybe it is the language that we see. But I wonder if every once in a while you look around, if you're anything like me, and you wonder, what is going on with the world? How do I understand it? And how, as people of faith who are called to share the good news with the world, how are we supposed to do that when so much of our world seems incomprehensible? In our text for this morning, Paul finds himself in this position. Paul is an apostle who experienced a calling into Christianity, and he has devoted himself as an evangelist and a church planter. He's written letters that have helped foster and facilitate new churches, and they make up most of the New Testament. And so he's constantly in spaces outside of his comfort zone, outside his understood world, sharing the good news. And this morning, we're going to be in the book of Acts, chapter 17, and Paul has made his way to Athens, wanting to share the good news about God's grace. And we're going to notice the way that Paul approaches this unfamiliar territory and what it can teach us about how we are called to share the good news that can feel, in a world that can feel unfamiliar to each of us. So we're going to be in the book of Acts this morning, chapter 17, verses 16 through 34. It says, while Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was deeply distressed to see the city was full of idols. So he argued in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and also in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Also, some Epicurean and Stoic philosophers debated with him. Some said, "What does this pretentious babbler want to say?" I told the first service, that's what I don't want the kids to say about me. Feel free to include me in your prayers. All right. It says, others said, he seems to be a proclaimer of foreign divinities. This was because he was telling the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. So they took him and brought him to the Areopagus and asked him, may we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? It sounds rather strange to us, so we would like to know what it means. Now all the Athenians and the foreigners living there would spend their time in nothing but telling or hearing something new. Then Paul stood in front of the Areopagus and said, Athenians, I see how extremely spiritual you are in every way. For as I went through the city and looked carefully at the objects of your worship, I found among them an altar with the inscription, to an unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, he who is Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in shrines made by human hands, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mortals life and breath and all things. From one ancestor he made all peoples to inhabit the whole earth, and he allotted the times of their existence and the boundaries of the places where they would live, so that they would search for God and perhaps fumble about for him and find him. Though indeed he is not far from each of us, for in him we live and move and have our being. As even some of your own poets have said, for we too are his offspring. Since we are God's offspring, we ought not to think that the deity is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of mortals. While God has overlooked the times of human ignorance, now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed on a day on which he will have the world judged in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And of this he has given the assurance to all by raising him from the dead. When they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some scoffed, but others said, we will hear you again about this. At that point, Paul left them, but some of them joined him and became believers, including Dionysius the Areopagite and a woman named Damaris and others with them. So Paul is in a situation that seems foreign to him. He has been sharing the good news in the synagogue and the street, and he's called into the Areopagus, this elevated, open-air site just west of the Acropolis in Athens. And meetings there are filled with intellectuals who would gather and debate, akin to a city council or a town assembly. And there, in that space, Paul speaks to them. He shares the good news. But I want us to notice how he does it, what strategies he employs. In a much better way than I could, we see Paul recognize and celebrate the Athenians. He notices their language and their culture and their values. He celebrates them and uses that as a way to offer them the gospel. In this high-minded space in Athens, he uses the philosophies of the day. He draws on Epicurean language, telling them that he knows that they believe that they can't definitively say if God is real. And even if God is, God would be so far off. How would we even know what God would want from us? Paul says, I know that you believe that. But what if God knew that? God knew that God seemed so hard to find and comprehend that God came to change that, embodied in a person who could demonstrate and show us the power of the love of God stronger than even death. And then he continues using the language of the Stoics. He says, I know you see God in everything. What if everything isn't God, but everything reflects the God who made all things? That God in whom each of us find our being. He quotes their philosophies and ideals. He celebrates their religiosity and curiosity and their desire to worship. He says, you know you are so created to worship. You know that so well. That even in the midst of all of these gods, you have a statue to an unknown God just in case you missed one. Friends, that's piety. What if I told you that this unknown God is a God that I know? And even further, that this God knows you. There are all kinds of other ways to interpret what Paul does here with the Athenians, using their language and talking about their philosophies. And there are other ways that you can read it. Maybe taking their language and twisting it, or speaking about it derogatorily. But I think these words ring the truest when they're read as sincere. Paul moves into this space in Athens and he respects their context and he offers them hope exactly where they are. In his commentary on this text, Reverend Dr. Will Willimon says that the church often finds itself in this position, that we can look out on a world that we don't understand. a world that we might see as full of hatred or apathy or hurt or weird language that first graders use that we don't get. And he says that the church, rather than standing back, pointing our fingers in righteous indignation, should minister to their searching. I think that's what Paul is doing. He takes the values and the culture and the language of these people he hopes to serve, to be in community with. And he says, I have experienced the love and resurrection of Jesus Christ in a way that has changed my life. How can I best share it with those around me? And the best way he seems to find is understanding what the people he is serving care about. To become curious about how they're thinking. To offer the good news in a language that's helpful and respectful and matters to them. And in all my searching to learn the newest slang, that's what I'm trying to do for these students. But I think that's what we're all called to do. Friends, our world is so messy and heartbreaking and can feel at times incomprehensible to us. But we know that it doesn't grow closer to the kingdom of God when we draw lines and double down on our differences. Rather, the world looks more like the kingdom of God, that place that we're moving toward, where the love of God reigns. When we listen, when we get curious, when we cross over the lines that we have drawn and demonstrate the good news to others exactly where they are. In seminary, we had to take all of these classes on evangelism, sharing the good news. And we had to do it specifically as it related to a United Methodist context. And we found out something shocking. Do y'all know the quickest way to not have someone agree with you? Argue with them. It is an election year after all. But it turns out that if we want to invite people into a different way of thinking or to share new information with people, that's hard. Even information about faith. That the most effective way is what's called deep canvassing. So canvassing is, going door to door, sharing your pitch about an idea or a person or a party. And instead, deep canvassing is long, real, vulnerable, empathic conversations over time. Studies have found over and over the best way to share something with someone is to not just share an idea, but to share a person, a story, a life with someone. And it works in all kinds of different contexts that we could talk about, but I think my favorite is when God had some things that we needed to reimagine and offered us the person of Jesus Christ. Friends, where are you being called to follow God's prompting to show up and share good news even in a world that feels beyond what we can understand? Where are you being called to live into love and grace, knowing that we do our best at sharing the good news of a loving God when we ourselves are loving? Where are you being called to minister to another's longing, to get curious and compassionate and show up in ways that make sense and matter to others? As we close this morning, I want to share with you a short video put out by the North Texas Conference of the United Methodist Church. It's part of a continued push toward blessing children in our community, and it shows how we can specifically do that throughout the school year. And so this video shows one example of someone who took that call to minister to someone exactly where they are in ways that might matter most to them, how they took that call seriously and the serious impact that it had. So let's watch together.
I was raised in South Korea until I was in middle school, and I spent a significant chunk of my childhood away, separated from my parents, starting when I was about in first grade, and I didn't get to reunite with them until I was 14. And about when I was in fourth grade, I woke up one morning and I had this tug in my heart to go to church. My mother raised me in the church, and I knew that I wanted to be in church, but there was no one in my family who were going to church who were believers, and so I decided to go to the church all by myself as a fourth grader. And in this little country church was this lady by the name of Haesuk Park. She was not the pastor of the church. She was certainly not the youth pastor. She was a faithful, congregant, middle-aged Christian who took notice of me. She would take an offering envelope and she would stuff cash and write encouraging words and prayers for me. And in fact, I still to this day keep some with me. And this particular one, it goes like this. If I were to translate in English, my daughter, I pray this new year will be a year of much blessing. I pray you continue to glorify the Lord by being your beautiful self. The way Haesuk Park has faithfully served this random, weird girl in her church has certainly changed my life and the way I relate to God. And God has worked through her serving, through her faithfulness in unique ways in my life to bring restoration and healing.
When I hear that story, I think that's our calling. Haesuk Park saw the longing of another person. She noticed the ways that Danielle Kim might best receive the love of God. And all it took was an offering envelope and a few dollars, a pen, and consistent love and care. Friend, she didn't have to preach a sermon. She didn't have to dedicate her whole life to something. She noticed the need of someone else, offered what she could for them, and let God do the rest. Friends, this is our call. Our good news is too good. It's too life-changing to let division keep us from sharing it. It's not just our call to share good news, but to share it so that others might really hear it. Because friends, as I was working on my messages for Glen Lake, as I was preparing this message today, I couldn't help but remember someone did that work for me. They offered the good news in a way that I could hear it. So I covet your prayers this week as I go and spend some time learning from and ministering with and being in community with these young people. Maybe pray that I get like one of those words right. But I'll also be in prayer for you, because God is calling each of us to notice the world around us and to serve it in a way that matters to them, so that God might be glorified, that we might share the love that we are given. Friends, this is our challenge. May the Spirit within us rise to meet it.